Cool. Okay, welcome everybody to our Flawed Females in Crime author event. And why there should be more. There should be more of them. We love them, we can't get enough. We have a fabulous panel for you tonight, these four lovely authors. Ignore the square in the corner, that's my colleague who's helping with the technical things. My name is Lara, I work for Hillingdon Libraries. I'm like your host person for tonight. And Bernie will be monitoring the question and answer box. So feel free to put any questions throughout the whole interview in the question and answer box. Bernie will submit those to the authors at the end. Couple of you already like in the chat box, which is great, that's lovely. If we miss things in the chat box, I'm really sorry, but we'll definitely look at it if it's in the Q&A box, so just so you know, that's fine. We are recording, so you know you're not on camera, don't worry if you've tuned in as there's someone else there.
I think I've messed up.
Hi, Alex.
I just sent Alex my Zoom link and now he's come on as me.
Alex, you are now part of the panel.
I've cloned myself to be Alex.
There's no problem, I'm quite used to it, it's fine.
Okay, fab. All right, lovely. So we have the four lovely ladies, myself and Alex, who are currently being recorded. Are you okay with that, Alex?
Absolutely fine, I do it every week, it's no problem.
Fine, lovely. All right, perfect. No one else is being recorded, so don't worry. You know. And apart from if you put your question to us, then of course, you know, we will discuss your question. But enough of all that. That's all the housekeeping stuff. I will introduce these lovely ladies. I'll start with Nikki Smith. We've all got your names on, lovely, that's great. Nikki studied English literature at Birmingham University before pursuing a career in finance, working in a variety of different companies, including an investment bank and trampoline park. I'm quite fascinated by that, actually. We should talk about that later. She always had a passion for writing and had a now or never moment when she applied for the Curtis Brown Creative 3-month course and never looked back. She entered a competition to be mentored by Amanda Reynolds. I bet that was amazing. I bet that was really, really interesting. And then obviously went on to publish. Her first book came out in April last year, so right at the beginning of lockdown, and then her second book, what we're talking about tonight, Look What You Made Me Do, came out in April of this year. So thank you very much, Nikki, for joining us.
That's okay. Hi everyone, lovely to be here.
Great, awesome. And then I'll go over to Jenny, who on my screen is that way. Jenny grew up in Essex and Berkshire, studied English lit at London. She's taught in London, Seville and Athens. She's very well travelled there. I thought you were Spanish, I must admit. So I thought, oh, it's nice, Mediterranean
Spanish
vibe.
background, but
yeah,
all a bit mysterious actually. My past, like my books. Spanish, no.
No, brilliant. And then she also, which I think is really interesting, has written some books to help, you know, people learn English as a foreign language, which go along with your first novel, The Missing Girl, which I think is quite interesting. You know, I've never met an author who has actually also created books for people to learn English. You're a graduate of the Curtis Brown creative writing course, and The Hiding Place is your third novel. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Awesome. And then I'll go underneath me. So Philippa's underneath me on my screen here. Philippa works as a clinical psychologist and therapist. She lives in Lincolnshire, I hope. Yes, awesome. I got that right. Yes. With her husband and a cat. Philippa has been writing short stories for a long time and been published in various literary journals. Little White Lies was her debut last year, and Safe and Sound is her second novel that came out in February 2021. So yes, thank you very much for being here.
Hello everybody, lovely to see you.
Thank you. And last but not least, of course, the lovely Fiona, who has been to Hillingdon before. Fiona is an award-winning journalist and graduate of the Faber Academy Writing a Novel course. Her debut, Rattle, was published to great acclaim and she was selected for Val McDermott's prestigious New Blood panel at the Theakston Crime Writing Festival. Rattle is now being adapted into a 6-part TV series. Has it been done? Is it still in process?
It's very complicated. Television is an interesting one. We can talk about that later, I think. But
we will.
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
Okay, all right, cool.
It's been optioned twice, so
yeah.
But it takes a long time. Things in the television world, doesn't it? So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, lovely. And then you went on to write a sequel to Rattle the Collector, and then several sort of standalone novels. Your latest brilliantly creepy book, When I Was 10, came out this month. So yes, thank you so much.
It's nice to be back. I was just saying it's a shame we can't be in the beautiful building that we were in before, but hopefully before too long we'll make it back.
Yes, and we have the other Philippa East in the corner. Who is Alex? So thank you for joining us. That's lovely. Perfect. I have like just a general like icebreaker question I want to throw out and just like get things going. Do you have a favourite flawed female character? Anyone?
Ooh, shall I start?
Yes.
I think my favourite flawed female is probably Gillian Flynn's Camille Spreaker in Sharp Objects. I love her. I think she's amazing. And talking about books to film, Fiona, I think the series with Amy Adams portrayed her brilliantly. I think she was great. So yeah, she's my favourite.
Great choice.
I'll chip in because my favourite would also be by Gillian Flynn, which is Amy Dunn from Gone Girl. Because basically, I mean, does these awful things, but she's kind of like, sometimes she's like got a point, and like you read some of her thoughts and you're like, yeah, like her fucking boyfriend cheated. Sorry, excuse my French. Her boyfriend cheated on her. Like, he deserves some punishment here. And then you're like, oh, but no, you can't. So yeah, like she's super flawed, but there's also bits of her that we're like, yeah, I think like that too. Or maybe that's just me.
Well, no, funnily enough, I was going to say Amy Dunn as well. I think obviously Gillian Flynn has a real talent for writing, flawed characters, flawed females. And I think, I mean, for similar reasons to Philippa, I suppose, but because what I'm drawn to is the contrast, and because actually, are we not all flawed? That's the thing. Are we not all imperfect ourselves? And so, I don't know, I love reading about complex women really in literature, because is that not who we are really, all of us?
Yeah, I would say somebody different. Eileen by Ottessa Mosfegh. Have you read? Do you know that? I have it on my desk in case I was asked. And she's a pretty appalling character all the way through. But there's just something so fascinating, isn't there, about women who are flawed, or anyone who's flawed actually. And as you say, Fiona, it reflects us, doesn't it? And I think the reader can pick that up, can't they? They can sort of associate with these people as they read.
And even someone like, I was just thinking about, I don't know what this says about me really, but like even someone like Annie Wilkes in Misery or something like that, you know, I can still sort of identify with her. I mean, and like, obviously she has a massive great hammer and smashes in his feet at the end of it, but there is something about, and that's the thing about brilliantly flawed women, we can all see something of ourselves within them, I think, if it's done well.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can fall into certain tropes, can't you? Which I'll sort of ask about later. But no, that's really interesting, especially with the whole Gillian Flynn thing. I hadn't gone down that. I've read Gone Girl, and I saw Sharp Objects on the telly, but I haven't read the book, so I must do that definitely.
But I think there are a lot of contemporary crime writers, particularly women, writing really interesting female characters across the board, really, people like Harriet Tice, or I don't know, just anyone who has a female detective, for example, in their fiction as well, because these are three-dimensional women going through all of the issues that many women face, you know, every single day, whether you're talking about alcoholism, whether you're talking about, you know, losing a baby, whether you're talking about cheating or being cheated upon, all of these things, you know, and I think there's a lot of women doing it very, very well at the minute.
Yeah, definitely. And
I think you're right, Fiona. I mean, humans are empathic by nature, aren't they? I think generally. And I think it's that kind of empathy. You identify with these people who are flawed and you look at why they're flawed. And that's what makes us human, I think, when we can kind of, you know, pick up on things like that and sympathize with them, empathize with them.
And I think a little bit like that you're touching on, Fiona, I think the psychological thriller genre is such a brilliant vehicle for women writers, because it's sort of one of the tropes is that it's in the domestic sphere, right, which is, you know, arguably the women's traditional world. And it's like giving women a chance to shine a spotlight on all the really kind of taboo and grisly parts of our psyche that we're not supposed to show to the public. You know, we're supposed to be sweetness and light and, you know, subservient and maternal and all these things. And I think the psychological thriller has so fascinatingly explored actually what women, how, not to those extremes that you might read in a book, but like the fact that women get angry, the fact that women get revengeful, the fact that women don't always bond with their children, the fact that women maybe hate their husband, you know, all these kind of things. And I think it's been like a real liberation for women to just like put all this stuff down, not as like a role model, but just almost to give it a voice and give it a space. And yeah, I think it's brilliant. I love it.
I think
sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite interesting because if you look back over history, women have been trying to do that for forever, haven't they? If you think about Jane Eyre wasn't the traditional heroine. She was the plain looking, plain speaking young woman who didn't do what she was supposed to do, didn't behave how she wasn't passive. She wasn't. So it was almost, women have been trying to do this for years, and then suddenly now it's all sort of, you know, we're allowed to do it more easily.
And following on from that, I mean, you know, Bertha, White's, I guess, OC, you know, it's just, you know, she is the mad woman in the attic.
Yeah.
She's such an interesting character.
Or even someone like Lady Macbeth, you know, who is, you know, obviously a really sort of well-known, recognised character, and lots of sort of Shakespearean characters in some way. But I looked up kind of what flawed actually meant. I looked it up and it said kind of, you know, with mark, blemish or imperfection, that's what it said. And I thought, well, you know, show me the person that doesn't have any of those things. And that's what I love about flawed women. And you know, I've kind of, this subject's interesting, I think, to me, because, you know, in some ways you think, you know, these women, it's not flawed women, it's just women. It's just women.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's just normal. We might not have such exaggerated flaws as you see in, you know, some literature, you know, like say, you know, Amy Dunn with her, you know, covered in scars and whatever, but it just, yeah, the flaws make people normal, and that's what you identify with. If you don't have a character with flaws, they're not interesting. There's nothing for anyone to empathize with. You don't recognize yourself in them at all. So
Do you think the term flawed woman has become a bit of like, it's the updated version of the strong woman? You know, like it was like, oh, we like books with strong women characters, and now it's like, oh, we're writing books with flawed women characters. Like, they're just women. Like, that's the point. Yeah. Like, we don't have to be surprised and give it a label when a woman has general strength or is not perfect. So it's interesting, isn't it, how it's still like you have to pigeonhole these women and sort of point out like, oh, that's odd, that's not a woman, that's a flawed woman, and that's not a woman, that's a strong woman.
True, because would you do that to a male character? You know,
strong male character and a flawed male character. I mean, no, you just have Jack Reacher, who's just Jack Reacher, right? I mean, he's pretty flawed, but we don't talk about flawed men in fiction. We just get to have men writing about men writing fiction. Men writing fiction. Sorry, I'm going off on one now.
That was fantastic. Thank you. It was all like an opening discussion around the theme. It was wonderful. What I'll do now is just go around to each of you and just sort of focus on your novels that you've brought out most recently. start with Fiona. Why not?
Hello.
Hi. Would you like to tell us a little bit about when I was 10?
Well, handily, here's one I made earlier.
Wonderful.
So when I was 10, it's my 4th novel. It's a standalone story. And it features a journalist this time instead of a detective. I mean, normally in all of my books, I tend to have several strands running. So I'll have either a detective or a journalist, and then I'll have the kind of the sort of actual story that what's happening, I suppose. And that tends to be how my books somehow materialize. But when I was 10, it tells the story of Dr. Richard Carter and his wife, Pamela, and they're stabbed 14 times with a pair of scissors by one of their daughters in what has become one of the most infamous double murders of the modern age. And 10-year-old Sarah Carter, their daughter, spent 8 years in a children's secure unit where she was nicknamed the Angel of Death. But now she's living quietly under an assumed name with her family. And then basically on the anniversary of the trial, a documentary team tracked down her older sister Shannon, and they compel her essentially to break 2 decades of silence. And the explosive interview that she gives sparks huge headlines. And Brinley Booth, who is my journalist, and she's a childhood friend of the Carter sisters, she's tasked with covering the story with devastating consequences for all of them, really. And what I wanted to do in this book, I was kind of really exploring all sorts of ideas. I wanted to explore whether if you commit the most horrific of crimes, are you ever entitled to a second chance? You know, I want to examine the idea of kind of rehabilitation, but also, you know, are you inherently evil? Do you become evil? Are you a product of your circumstance? And one of the things that I wanted to do was create a sympathy for my female characters. And then also Brinley is a national newspaper journalist, and I wanted to give readers a flavour of what it would be like to be in the heart, having been a journalist myself, what it's like to be in the middle of a big breaking news story as it unfolds. And what happens in that book is pretty much exactly what happened whenever I was covering a big news story.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. It's a really, really fascinating book, I think. And one of the angles that really fascinated me the most about your book, you know, as well as the really, really interesting female characters, was this whole trial by media situation that happened. And I think that's quite a modern thing, you know, ever since like that Serial podcast or Making a Murderer on Netflix. You know, there's all these armchair detectives who are like, right, you know, I'm going to investigate this and I'm going to come to my own conclusion, you know, sod the law, I'm just going to do it.
I mean, everyone's a journalist these days. You know, with a smartphone, you can record your own footage and you can upload it to social media, and people have opinions that, you know, they break the law all the time in terms of, you know, the regulations regarding to contempt of court and all of that sort of stuff, and how, you know, things like I was examining a bit how things leak on Twitter, and how, you know, names these days, I mean, not so much when I was a journalist, but, you know, you can find out the name of a victim from Twitter or from Facebook. You can get photographs, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So I was really kind of interested in that. But also I wanted to look at, you know, women and examine like a female working journalist in a tabloid environment. And, you know, people often have an opinion of tabloid journalists. You know, they believe that they lack integrity, that they are, you know, kind of sort of grasping, news hungry, you know, bitter, and like, that was not really my experience, actually. And, you know, I'm still friends with lots of people that I worked with at the Mirror, and, you know, believe it or not, we tried to do right by the people whose stories we were covering. You know, we tried to get to the heart of the story, to interview people fairly. And you know, what I wanted to show with Brinley, she's an overweight, you know, journalist who, you know, snacks on the job, who's got a crush on her colleague, who sometimes, you know, has a little voice in her head that is wanting to be ethical, you know, who doesn't. And that was often how I felt. You know, there was a line, every journalist's line in The Sand is different. And, you know, I had a line that I was not prepared to cross. And so it's also examining that to an extent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when that line makes you unforgivable, or not a sympathetic character.
Well, and I think so to put it into some kind of context, when I was a working journalist, say, I don't know, somebody had died in horrific circumstances, and you would sometimes be dispatched to the house to try and speak to the family, to try and get a photograph, to try and get some background information. I would only ever knock once. I mean, if I was told to go away, then I would go away, and I wouldn't leave the house. I would observe and make sure that no other journalists got in through the door and got the interview that I was supposed to be getting. But I wouldn't harass people. I would keep a respectful distance. And certainly in the early days of journalism, and I think it has changed a lot, to be fair. I think there are, people are much more mindful of this kind of thing. But, people would maybe knock on a door 2-3 times. And that to my mind, that is a harassment if someone's told you that they don't want to speak anymore. And so, it's those kind of things that I try to just give a flavour of it. And like sometimes a journalist on the road would tell their news desk that they'd done one thing, but would actually do something else in order to, I don't know, if you've got a little bit of integrity or moral fibre, that's what you would choose to do. You might imply that you've done something. It doesn't matter now. I mean, I don't know why I'm being all coy about it, because I don't work there anymore.
Give us all your secrets.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to have your line in the sand. That's what I meant when I had a line in the sand.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you so much. Really recommend it. Let's move on to Nikki. I'm trying to do it at random so we don't get stuck in like similar patterns. Tell us a little bit about Look What You Made Me Do.
Okay, I'll just say I've read Fiona's when I was 10, and I loved it as well. So yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah, my book is called Look What You Made Me Do. I think you can probably, other side, see it behind me. Yeah, it came out in April, and it's about the dark secrets that are hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect family. It's set in 1 month in July 2018, and it's about two sisters called Jo and Caroline, who are in their late 30s, both married. They've never got on whilst they were growing up. Caroline has always been their mother's favourite, or that's what Jo thinks. And then suddenly their father dies and leaves his entire inheritance to Jo. And it's really about the fallout that happens kind of after that particular incident. But within each family in the book, each family are hiding kind of secrets that kind of come out all the way through the novel. And it largely deals with the theme of kind of coercive control. I'm not spoiling anything plot-wise by saying that, because you find that out very early on. And so it's really about the appearances, I think, that we present to individuals, even if they're close to us in a family situation. Often what you think is going on in your family, there could be kind of, it's very much not how it appears on the surface, and there's kind of a lot more to it than that. So yeah, that's what I wanted to explore.
No, thank you. And just on that theme of the coercive control and I suppose you would call it sort of an abusive relationship, really, in the book. I mean, some of the things you get into are quite dark, Were you ever a bit hesitant about getting that dark? Because I always find that sort of a murder, or a murderer murdering someone seems to be okay, but when it's in the home, when it's domestic, it's a whole nother thing.
Yes, I mean, it is dark, and I mean, I like writing about kind of dark things, not because I want to sensationalize them at all, but I think it's important to reflect the reality of the women that live in this kind of situation. I did a lot of research. I spoke to a lot of people who'd unfortunately have been in this situation. I think 2 women a week still are killed by their partners. So it's something that's incredibly relevant today. And I've had a lot of messages from people who've read the book, actually, and not necessarily living in the same situation as my character is, but they can just identify with little things about the relationship that I've kind of picked out, and you know, they've texted me and said, oh, I was in a relationship where this happened, or you know, they did this, or and it's not necessarily anything that's I didn't really want to introduce a lot of physical violence into my book. I know that does happen in a lot of these situations, but it's more the insidiousness of it, and I think that that's what people have said that they can kind of feel after they've read it. It's really insidious, and it's just the pressure and the tenseness of feeling that anything could happen at any kind of particular moment, and kind of what's going to happen next. So
yeah, because you still get those people that are just like, why don't they just leave, you know? But I think your book really illustrates just how trapped, you know, you can be when you're in that situation.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's, I mean, I know, you know, I'd have probably, you know, thought, yeah, why don't people just leave? But it's never as simple as that for the women in these situations. They're kind of, often this situation kind of happens very gradually, and the person that they're with can appear to be one thing when they meet them, and then it's a kind of gradual change. They get cut off from their friends and family, and they become very isolated, and financially they're completely dependent on the person that they live with, and it's incredibly difficult to leave a situation like that, particularly if children are involved, because you know, you fear for your life and your children's life. So
yeah, brilliant, thank you. Yes, definitely recommend that one. I think we've already had a few people in the comments who are like, yeah, I've read them, I love them, they're great, which is awesome. So looking forward to your questions. Next I'm going to go with Jenny. Jenny,
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about The Hiding Place.
Okay, I also have one here. So this is my third novel, and it's about Marina. It's set in 2 time frames, and in the present-ish, Marina is, well, she was abandoned as a baby in a shared house in London, and she doesn't know the circumstances at all of what happened to her. So she is adopted, and she lives with a good family. She's happy. She has a happy childhood, so she's not an unhappy child, but she always has this sort of hankering to know who she is, this sort of sense of she doesn't know her identity. She wants to know her identity. So, and she always feels that she is connected to the house, that it wasn't a coincidence that she was left in the house. Somehow there was a reason. This is the secret of who she is. So she goes through life sort of not, you know, whatever. And then in her 20s, she happens to be in London. She goes to the house, and she sees that a flat is to rent in the house. So she decides to rent it and begin to investigate what happened. And then in the past, in the 1960s, we see Connie, who's 17, who is pregnant, whose boyfriend has left her. And in the 60s, this was a massive deal. And it follows her path and what happens to her as a pregnant young woman in the 60s. And eventually the 2 stories meet, and we discover the truth of Marina's identity. So yeah, that's what it's about.
Wonderful, thank you. A really intricate sort of character study of Marina, you know, who's just increasingly desperate to find out who her mother is, and in turn sort of who she is. And you know, she was sort of beautifully multifaceted, you know, just like a normal woman. I mean, was she difficult to write?
No, she wasn't. I don't know. I think my books always start with character, so the character is the most important thing for me, and the plot really comes afterwards. I think that's just how I work. So the characters come into my mind, and then I start to think about what's the most important relationships that they have. So by the time I start writing, I know the characters pretty well. So, and it's the plot that I don't know. So I know the beginning and I know the end, but I don't really know. I just sort of set off, and then it all sort of comes together eventually after quite a long time. But no, I find the characters, I don't know, they come quite quickly. So no, I have more difficulty with the plot than with the characters.
Yeah, I mean, is it true that you tend to fall into one or the other camp? You know, you're either a plotter or
or
you.
a pantser.
Yeah.
I believe so, and I'm the pantser. I mean, I do get to about 30,000 words, and I think, hang on, I better just check that this is going in a good direction, and then I might sort of go back and start plotting a bit, you know. But often I will not know who, if there's a death, if there's a killer. I don't always know who the killer is, so I sort of, you know, make it up as I go along, literally.
Wow. So you're as much in the dark as your reader as you're going along.
Yeah, quite often, until I get to a point, and then I do quite a short draft, so about 60,000 words or something. But and by that time I know. But although I might change my mind, I did change my mind in The Missing Girl, as to who was the baddie.
Oh,
Quite fun.
I want to know who it was. Richard, we'll talk about this after. We'll talk about it after. If you haven't read it, you must read it. Must read it. Lovely. Thank you so much, Jenny. And Philippa, tell us a little bit about Safe and Sound.
Sure. So Safe and Sound is this one. And, it's my second book. And I guess it's really a sort of like a mystery suspense book. And it's about, well, this the actual main protagonist who kind of serves the sort of investigator role in this book is a housing manager called Jen. And one day, you know, she's checking her jobs for the day and she realizes she's got to go and chase up a tenant who's not paid the rent, and she's arranged to meet the bailiffs at the flat. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary in her line of work, though it's a bit of a, you know, grim bit of the job, really. So they go and they knock on the door, and you know, they can hear a radio playing inside, so they're pretty sure that she's actually in there, but they keep knocking on the door and nobody comes to the door. And eventually Jen, the housing manager, just has a peek through the letterbox, and they see a huge pile of post built up inside, and they realize that obviously something is awry. So she uses her manager key to let herself in, but the door actually stops because it's chained from the inside. So clearly whatever's happened, somebody has been able to lock that door from the inside. So they managed to break down the door with the police, and they discover the remains of the tenant, and really it is remains. They later kind of date it that she's been there for about 10 months. And the really bizarre thing about it is obviously partly that her death went unnoticed for so long, but also that this tenant was a young woman who had a career, she had jobs, she had friends, she had an ex-boyfriend. So she's not at all the kind of profile of the sort of person that you would imagine, you know, being found dead in their apartment and nobody having noticed for a while. So Jen, the housing manager, for various reasons, basically takes it upon herself to try and unravel the mystery of how on earth this has happened, really, and who she was, and tracking down the people who were part of her life, and trying to get to the bottom of how this happened. And it was actually based on a true story. Some people may have seen the docudrama Dreams of a Life, which was a film made about a woman called Joyce Vincent, who basically very similar circumstances. So yeah, it's a mystery about all of that, with a few twists and turns along the way.
No, I think it's I think it's incredibly emotional, like just incredibly moving, thinking of this young woman dying and nobody finding out for 10 months. And yeah, absolutely, first thing I thought of was the Joyce Vincent case. And I was thinking, oh my god, I'm really pleased that someone has written something, you know, around this. Obviously, you know, not exactly that, but you know, around it. And what I really thought struck me was that it brings back this sort of very primal fear of this, you know, dying alone, and also the fact that she was a young woman just made it even worse. I mean, were you tapping into those fears as you were writing the book?
Yeah, very much. I mean, the inspiration very much came because I watched Dreams of a Life, and like you, I think I was so moved by this story and like haunted by it, really. I would use that word. I watched that film years ago, but I could never get it out of my head. And yeah, eventually felt like I needed to kind of process it myself by actually writing a book about it. And yeah, I think this idea of dying alone, I think it crosses all of our minds. And then I sort of looked at it from the other side in thinking, like, I'm pretty sure we've all got that friend that we probably haven't seen for, or been in touch with for maybe 6 months, maybe even a year. And we think of them as a friend, like maybe we went to school or university or we worked with them. And we sort of think, well, I haven't been in touch with them for a really long time, but I bet other people have. I bet that there's someone in her life who's way closer to her than I am. But what if everybody was thinking that? What if everybody thought, oh, I've not seen so-and-so for a while, but I bet somebody else has, you know? And I thought that's so tragic that you could just end up not being connected to anybody and everyone assuming that you had somebody. So yeah, I think I want, and you know, it sort of comes down to these themes about, you know, what do we present to the public world? What do we, you know, kind of, what do we hide from the world? How much do we let people know what's really going on in our lives? Yeah, we're so connected, but at the same time, are we really connected?
Especially in lockdown, you know what I mean? Like, I was just thinking, oh my God, like this could happen, you know, in a really scary, genuine way.
Yeah.
And hasn't there been a rise in domestic violence cases, hasn't there? You know, and child neglect and all sorts of things, because, you know, the normal safety nets of perhaps, you know, school teachers or, you know, neighbors or, you know, distant family or friends who might pick up on these things, you know, people are just behind closed doors. So it's even more prescient, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Brilliant, thank you. So I really hope if you haven't read the books, you really want to now.
You did a good job of selling them, Laura. Or ordering them from your library. You can do that.
Yeah. From my affiliate. No, I'm joking. No, but actually, I mean, what I would recommend, all the books are in the library, but if you did want to buy them, bookshop.org is a great place to buy them from online. You're supporting independent bookshops, and not getting them from those sort of huge global machines. So yeah, that would be great if you do want to buy it, which I'm sure you do. So moving on, I'd really like to, because the discussion before was so good, I really want to throw something a bit controversial into the mix and talk about violence against women, especially in crime fiction, and the Staunch Prize. And what's really interesting is that I had, Hillingdon Libraries had an all-male crime panel 2 weeks ago, and I threw this question out, and I just want to see if what you say is completely different to what they said. I won't tell you.
Will you tell us what they said afterwards?
After I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to take this one to Otters kick it off, because I know certainly amongst the community of female writers that I move within that, you know, actually controversially, many of us were, you know, underwhelmed by the concept of the Staunch Prize, because what most of us felt was that there are brilliant women writers out there who are writing about violence against women in empathetic, sort of emotionally perceptive ways, some who may have experienced violence themselves. You know, I've certainly been a victim of stalking myself, and that actually feeling really strongly that while women are still victims of crime, victims of rape, victims of domestic abuse, victims of murder, victims of coercive control, all of these things, that these stories deserve to be written about. You know, they can't just be brushed under the carpet and pretend they don't happen. You know, and I think that there are women who write with nuance. You know, it's not about, you know, the act of, and of course there is some violence that is problematic, you know, and I actually am quite careful, believe it or not, my books are very dark, but to not include what I would consider to be gratuitous violence, you know, really sort of violent, the nitty-gritty detail of writing an act of violence against a woman, just the more of the implication. But, you know, even so, I believe very strongly that, you know, while violence is happening against women, their stories should be told. You know, for those people who are watching who don't know, the Staunch Prize is a prize that is awarded to the book that doesn't contain any violence or rape against a female victim. That's pretty much it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
No, thank you.
That's my take on it. The others may have a different view.
I think the key, sorry.
No, go, Philippa.
I was thinking the key point that you were making there, well, you make the whole thing is a really good point, but the key bit that I was picking up on, Fiona, is when you said, why should their voices not be heard? And that's the key thing, because I think a lot of the time, these stories about violence against women weren't from the women's voices. They were, it was the women was sort of just this object to move the plot along. You know, it was like, oh, we need a victim, stick a pretty woman in there, that'll do. And now we've got this, you know, burly detective, you know, saving the day or whatever. And I think you're absolutely right, Fiona. I think it's, you know, it's going back to this whole idea about women telling their stories, and these things happen to women, these things happen all the time, like Nikki was saying. So, you know, shining a spotlight on that and writing books that explore that is spot on. But so I think it's about how the story is being told, and who is actually telling that story as well, who's literally the author. Also, I think that there's something to be said for, on the flip side, writing books in which women do not experience those things, to present that as, you know, people talk about this whole thing about you can't be it if you don't see it. And actually to present dynamics of female-male relationships or women's situations where they're not victims, I think is also important, not to ignore what's happening to women, but to model, look, this is how you can relate to women, or this is how women can be treated, or this is how women can move around the world. Wouldn't it be great if it was this? So holding them up as aspirational stories of how we would like it to be, like someone writing a book that has a young Black girl as the lead character. You know, it's like, why don't we do that to show that a Black woman could be a leader? Do you know what I mean? So we don't have to write stories all the time about a young Black girl being downtrodden. I mean, those are important stories too, but what about if we write the opposite to show this is also what it could be? So that's my take on it.
Thank you. Nikki?
Yes, I mean, I echo what Fiona said. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's important that people just write whatever stories that they feel that should be told, and I don't think people should feel censored in any way in terms of, well, I can't write about a female victim who's experienced violence. I mean, I chose not to show gratuitous violence in you know, in Look What You Made Me Do, when one of my characters is experiencing coercive control, but that's just because that was how I chose to tell the story. If I'd have chosen it to tell it a different way, it wouldn't, you know, I don't think that I should be told that I can't write it that way, because there are women out there who experience that violence, and that should be shown. I think, providing it's not a kind of two-dimensional character who's just set up as a victim who's female, and, you know, some serial killer comes along, kills them off, and, you know, they're just simply a plot device. Well, I mean, that's just a bad book. It's not necessarily, you know, something that shouldn't be written about, the whole kind of theme about violence against women. So, yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Well, yeah, I would agree as well. It's a question of also giving the so-called victims a rounded character, so that they are people. They're not just, as you say, a plot device, something to move the plot along and not to add anything else to the story, and to show them as people who have families and people who are affected by, you know, by the violence or by their death or whatever it is that's happened to them. They need to be fully rounded as people, not just victims, I guess.
It's a difficult way to draw the line, though, isn't it? It's like, when is someone just a plot device, and when are they a character? You know, it's a really fine line, and it's such a.
But I think, you know, with any, like, if you have a female victim, you know, even if they are like a, you know, a device to move the story along or to kick off the story in some way, you know, it's perfectly possible to bring a character to life in, you know, a sentence or two.
Yeah,
you can make someone come to life. You can breathe life into your character with, you know, a few carefully chosen words. And, you know, it's exactly as you were saying, it's not about being 2D, it's about bringing your character sort of to life. And even if they are, you know, the discovery of a body at the start of a story, or whatever, you know, a female victim, you know, later on in that story, when you come to learn more about the victim, that's when you bring her to life, you know. That's when you bring her to life.
Yeah, and through other people's reactions. So if it's a detective finding the body, then you can do it through their reactions as well, and people in sort of a sensitive
and there are a lot of male writers out there who are trying really hard to do the right thing as well. You know, I mean, you know, male writers do, and there are some who do, you know, and I think partly the prize was maybe, you know, I think their heart is in the right place with the prize. That's the thing. And I think that there are, you know, certainly some male writers out there who don't think carefully enough about how they might portray a victim of rape or a, you know, a murder or whatever. But, you know, I know that there are a lot of male writers out there who think really carefully about the female characters that they are writing, and, you know, try to deal with this kind of stuff in a sensitive and empathetic way. What did the men say then?
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is they basically said the same thing.
Okay.
Oh, that's a relief.
Yeah, but and basically said, you know, they totally agree with it, with the sort of the ideology around it, you know, and the reason that it was started, but just completely saying no, there should be no violence against women just doesn't make sense.
No,
that was sort of generally.
Oh, when we live in a world without violence against women.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Art reflects life, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's quite interesting to subvert it though as well, like in, say, My Sister the Serial Killer, where it's just subverted. So it's the sister and the female is killing men, and it's I think that's quite an interesting way to deal with
it. Has anyone read the Sweet Pea novels by C.J. Skews, which are just like Rhiannon, who is like basically a homicidal maniac, but she like in this she draws up these kill lists of people who have just annoyed her, and I bet there's a brilliant dark humor that runs through those books as well, which are really, I mean, she's a fantastic, you know, flawed character if you're, you know, looking at it in that way. And also Liz Nugent as well writes absolutely, I meant to mention her earlier, writes absolutely fantastic flawed female characters, you know, like a novel like Skin Deep. She just gets right under the skin of these characters. I could really recommend those too.
Fabulous. You heard it here first. Those are Fiona's recommendations. Thank you.
I think it's funny, it's interesting you said it was comic, because My Sister the Serial Killer has got comic, and Killing Eve, of course, which is fantastic, it's got that sort of comic element running through it. So that's quite interesting that when it becomes the women killing the men, it's sort of comic rather
maybe
than...
it's a device to make it more palatable.
Yeah, you sort of make it slightly surreal, don't you, with the comedy? You make it, you know, not you kind of hang a flag to say this isn't realistic, this is just a bit of fun, you know. Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same, Jenny. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to. And again, like banging on about Gone Girl, that was about a woman killing a man, right? Or trying to kill a man, trying to get him done through the death penalty. And you know, that book subverts so many tropes, doesn't it? But
I still kind of get her. That's the crazy thing. It's like,
exactly.
I get it. I get why.
But it's like on the flip side of that, it's like Caroline Kepnes's books, you know, and everyone's going, oh, Joe, like he's he's murdering all his girlfriends, but loads of women are going, I still really fancy him. It's just like wrong in every way.
That's another comic one again, isn't it? That's kind of comic. So it's interesting, isn't it? That I mean, I guess if nothing else, I guess that prize just shone a spotlight on the whole issue, and we've been having, you know, a really good debate about it, I think, and it probably has just sort of freshened up the, you know, the kind of way people are going about writing those stories, and it can only be a good thing, even if the prize itself maybe, you know, fell a bit flat or whatever. But I think it's done its work, hasn't it? I think. Yeah,
I don't actually know what's happened to it now. Actually, I'm not entirely sure.
I think it's still ongoing as far as I'm aware, but I do know some authors requested that their books weren't even submitted for it because they didn't want to be considered for it. But, you know, and I mean, and while I don't, you know, agree with prizes, as Philippa said. I think, you know, certainly their hearts were in the right place with it. But it's freshened up the debate and you know, made us all think about why we write the way we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And another thing that I would quite like to touch on, obviously our conversation now has been very sort of gender binary, you know, very sort of like men are men, women. And of course, you know, you could say that, you know, your gender is on a spectrum, you know, it is something that we're talking about now, and I think it's quite interesting. And is that something that you think needs to be addressed or has been addressed in the crime writers community?
I think that's a really interesting question, Lara, because I think one of the things that I've noticed in reading crime books recently is it's quite common to see a gay character. So the detective might be gay, or the journalist might be gay, or the police officer, or something like that. You know, when they come home to their partner is a same-sex partner. And, you know, that's fantastic. And I think, you know, it's lovely to see that, you know, these characters isn't the right word, because you know, these talk about real people, but you know, that these relationships are being portrayed in books just as mainstream. You know, it's just this is just these people, and the book is not about them, is not focusing on the fact that they're gay. It's just the same way as they'd go home to a, you know, a different sex partner. That's what's in the story. This one, it's the same sex partner, and I think that's brilliant. But I don't think we're nowhere near that with transgender yet. But hopefully, maybe it will follow the same.
I think it you know, it poses a really interesting question, and it's again this issue of own voices, isn't it? Yeah. About, you know, whether you feel that you are the right person to write a book that might feature a transgender character, or, you know. And I think I have no answer to that. I mean, I think it's a tricky question, you know, for lots of writers, because, you know, the whole thing about own voices, and I think because writers might argue that they wouldn't want to be kind of constrained by anything, that, you know, that everything should be open to a writer, absolutely everything, you know. But by the same token, feeling passionately, desperately that you might want to, you know, do a really good job, or you wouldn't want to step on someone else's toes, or you wouldn't want to, you know, make, you know, a fundamental error in your representation of that character. And it's something to think about. I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and you know, I'm still thinking about it.
Yes, it's how far you kind of write outside your own experience, I think, isn't it? Is, you know, writing characters that kind of, obviously you don't write characters that are you, but you I think that there is a certain element. I mean, I'm quite a new author in terms of only having 2 books out, and you kind of don't stray too far away from being, you know, your own experience, I think, to a certain extent. And maybe with more experience, you feel that you could do something like that justice. But I wouldn't want to write anything that, you know, that I felt I couldn't do it justice, and I couldn't tell that person's story well enough. So yeah, I think it's I think, as Philippa said, there's a way to go yet.
Jenny, anything to add to that?
No, I think I agree basically with what you're saying. Nikki, particularly that last thing you said about speaking from your own experience, it's risky to go outside your box. And if you do take on something new, you have to be responsible, and you have to, you know, give it the responsibility and the respect it deserves. So I think you do have to be a confident writer to do that.
I mean, and I think there are lots of publishing houses that are employing sensitivity readers and things like that now. But even so, I don't always think that necessarily goes far enough.
And I think there's something about, you know, it's like which way you're coming at it. You sort of saying, oh, well, you know, whatever authors we've currently got on our books should try and write about this section of society so that we're, you know, sharing those stories. Or should we say, what we want is to get that section of society on our books so they can just write stories.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. And I wouldn't want, like, I would really hate the idea that, you know, me writing a character who might be transgender would actually stop a transgender writer from getting their book published. You know, so I think it's a really kind of, you know, interesting question. And I, you know, there's so much nuance, isn't it? And it's difficult to kind of get to the heart of that in 5 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
I think you did a pretty good job, to be fair. You know?
And I know I wasn't supposed to be on the panel, but I think that that's quite ironic, because I avoid trying to write about disability myself. So I know what you mean.
That's really interesting, actually. So you actually try to write what, you know, sort of away from your experience.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I don't want to be labelled either, so I avoid it.
Yeah,
that
makes sense. Yeah.
That's another good point. Well, I mean, I've been having such fun. We're kind of overrunning slightly. So I am going to just check in with Bernie and see what fascinating questions we have in the Q&A. Bernie, what have we got?
Hi everyone, it's been really great actually. We've got a couple of questions. We've got one from Ginny. She asks, do you work your characters up from a basic idea or event, or are they formed as a person, from a person you've observed?
I think I have a loose idea about kind of what kind of characters I'd like to write about. For example, in my new novel, I have 2 sisters and a journalist, all female, and they each occupied very distinct roles in my head before I even started writing. So I don't know, like for me, character and plot are so closely interlinked. I don't really separate them because often the character, I think, almost, you know, dictates the plot to some extent. Once you know why your characters are doing what they're doing, the story tells itself.
Yes, I'd agree with that. So as what I said before actually is that the characters come first for me, sort of almost fully formed, and although it takes me quite a while to think about them and to see where they're going, but yeah, I think you can't really do the plot until you know what their motivations are and who they are, what they want, what their issues are.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, I don't think I'd base any character entirely on somebody who I knew. It's not, I mean, I might pick bits of people that I've seen and kind of incorporate them into one of my characters, but yeah, they're not, it's not like I kind of observe somebody and think, oh yeah, I'm gonna put her in my book. I don't do that. They kind of form themselves inside my head, and then I write about them, kind of thing. And I think, you know, Fiona's right, often, you know when you've got a really good character, because it does help with the plot. I think it just, they kind of drive the plot themselves, kind of thing, if you know them well enough. I think often, you know, you can find out, that's when you find that your book isn't on the right track, when your kind of character runs out of steam, or they start doing things that you kind of didn't think that they were going to do. It's because you don't know them well enough. So if you know them really well, then I think that kind of carries the plot forward.
Oh, can I just interject there and say that although I probably shouldn't admit this, but I was out to dinner last night with some friends, and in my new book there is a teen bully in it, and one of my friends says, was that from school? And I was like, yes, it was.
Well, there's got to be revenge in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. This is the joy of being a writer. Settle all those scores.
But actually, I think that fits with the idea that I think so many of our characters are kind of reflections of us and our own experiences. So I think that, you know, when we go back to perhaps key figures from our early years, you know, whether that's parents or friends or teachers or whatever, I think they often come out in the characters in our books. I think sometimes we have like recurring characters in our books, like a sort of archetypal character that will crop up, or one that we tend to find ourselves writing. And if we think like, actually, who do I know in my life that's like that, we'll often find that there's a template from our lives. Yeah, I think the same for me. I think characters, once I know them, they're kind of all there. But sometimes it takes time to kind of crack them and like get to know them. It's like with the actual real person, isn't it? Sometimes they'll say something that kind of just gives you massive insight into their character, or they'll do something you're like, oh, they're that kind of person. And I remember when I was writing Safe and Sound, I was struggling quite a while to figure out Jen and Jen's character and what she's really about and how she operates. And then for anyone who's read the book, or anyone who does read the book, there's a scene where she goes to the swimming pool and is like, she sort of does something at the swimming pool that's kind of a bit odd. And when that scene came to me and I saw her doing that, I was like, I get her. I just get how she operates. I get how she, you know, how she relates to herself and her emotions and stuff. And that kind of opened the whole character up for me. But it took a while to kind of, just see that one thing that she did. And then I was like,
Excellent. It's really interesting. I've got a question from Garima. Do the flawed female characters have anything in common? I'd like to take that first.
As a general, just like, do they generally have anything in common?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I would say not necessarily, because I think if you're writing well, they're just reflecting kind of different women. If we're talking about women here, or if we're just talking about characters, they're just reflecting different aspects of people's personalities. And just like all people aren't the same, then you're not just going to get flawed characters who are the same. I don't think. I think if you're writing kind of realistically, they'll all be different, because we're all different, and who you're writing, your characters are all different. So
yeah, I agree with that to a large extent, although I wonder whether the characters that we're focusing on, by the very dint that they're in the novels, that they probably, the thing that they have in common is that maybe they all want something, whether it's kind of a revenge, or I don't know, a certain lover, or some particular outcome. Maybe that's what they have in common, the desire for something. We just don't know what that is.
And I think maybe also, we were talking about this idea of them, characters being really three-dimensional. I think that in a way that's what we're talking about when we talk about flawed women. We're talking about complex women. We're talking about women who are not, just straight down the line. And I think what makes those kind of characters really interesting is they often have insight into their flaw, that these characters know that they have this weak spot, or this vice, or that, whether it's alcohol, or whether it's, falling for the wrong guy all the time, or being jealous, or whatever it is, that they kind of have insight into that flaw. And often I think what's really interesting to see in a book is almost that the woman is on the one hand kind of giving in to that flaw, and the other hand fighting it. And I think that makes just a really interesting storyline of like, how does she kind of resolve that? Because sometimes the flaws give her the advantage as well, to be if you're jealous, it makes you fight for what you want, for example. So yeah, I think maybe this idea of women who are flawed and have insight into that flaw and are kind of battling that flaw as well.
Yeah, and absolutely, and there's so many extremes and varieties of flaws that it just crosses the spectrum, really, from being a bit mean to murdering several people. So it's so wide.
Maybe we should have a competition, like who can come up with the best flaw for your female protagonist. Like, what could be like the most messed up thing, or the most like tragic failing that they could have.
But it's their very flaws that keep you glued. You kind of reading on in a kind of, like, you're horrified, but you just can't put it down at the same time. It kind of keeps you going. Yeah. And as far as that goes, Stu's asked, do you have your flaws planned, or do you develop them as you write?
I think they probably develop as you, well, I think to an extent. I mean, for me, I generally know, say, who my killer's going to be, and one or two of the major reveals in the novels that I write, and so they are planned to an extent. But I would say that what happens during the writing process is that kind of layering up, that making your characters more nuanced and more interesting. I mean, I talk about this a lot, but that's one of the things that fascinates me most, and it's a recurring theme in my writing, this kind of shades of grey, that actually all of us even if we consider ourselves to be good people, have capacity for evil, in the same way that, you know, somebody who might kill also may love too. And so I you know, I think, yeah, I probably do have a clearish idea of the flaw. But to give you a case in point, I've been working on my 5th novel, and it's always my weakest spot. The kind of, you know, my agent always says the same thing. Yes, but why? You know, why are they doing what they are doing? Because that motivation is absolutely key. And so that's what often happens in the development of my character. When I'm considering the why, there's a reason why they do the things that they do, and what that reason is then helps to contribute to the rounding of their character, I'd say.
That's so interesting, Fiona. That is absolutely fascinating, because I think I'm the opposite. So
Okay.
I'm like sort of working it out because as you were talking, I was like having little light bulbs going on. And I was thinking, like, I think that when I start with a character, it's their flaw which drives the plot. The whole plot is generally about them overcoming that flaw. So I have to kind of know that flaw in the beginning. And yes, there's kind of the external plot that goes on. But for me, so much of what I'm trying to cover in the book is that the resolution is that character will or won't overcome that flaw. So I couldn't start the story without knowing their flaw, because it's kind of the whole challenge that character has to overcome. It's what
That's so interesting, isn't it? The way writers
the plot
write differently.
tests them. Yeah, the plot is what's going to test them to deal with that flaw. It's like when something in life comes at you that is going to hit your weak spot, and you've got to deal with it, and you've got to address your weak spot or be crushed by it. So yeah, that's yeah, kind of just like have a big sort of, you've just popped up the light bulbs for me. It's so helpful, thank you.
We've all witnessed it, we're all witnesses.
Yeah, you were there at the moment.
That happened.
Oh, I'm trying to work out what I do now that you said that. I'm not quite sure. I think it's all just the maths.
I think it was way out in the end.
But I think what I would say is about all of us who are writing kind of interesting women is that readers, it's, you know, in most of the, you know, books that we read, that we remember, that we love, it is the character that you remember. It's not the story, it's the character. And so, you know, that I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and thinking, you know, actually in some ways the plot and the story are incidental, because what you want is, and you know, in a lot of series fiction, it's about the character. That's what makes it so popular, isn't it? That's why people keep coming back, because they care about the fate of the character. And Absolutely. So I've been thinking a lot about paying, you know, as much attention as possible to character.
I think that's so true, Fiona. I think one of my favourite books from last year, We Begin at the End, and I thought about it for ages, and it's not a complicated plot, but it's just the characters. It's a book by Chris Whitaker, and I just thought he had, you know, he just wrote the most memorable characters, and those are the kind of books I think that stay with you, rather than the plot. So yeah, I've thought a lot about that as well. Yeah.
Do you think there's a big difference between the way that you know, as women, you write flawed female characters, and the way that maybe male authors would tackle it? Do you think there's a big difference?
I think absolutely, because we are, you know, we are all a sum of our own prejudices in some way, our own experiences. And, you know, there are 1,000,001 tiny things that will have happened to me throughout my life that would have shaped my writing, you know. And, you know, you could ask us to write, you could give us the same broad outline for a story, and all the stories that we would come up with would be so fundamentally different, because, you know, we are, like I said, you know, we are a product of our upbringing, of our prejudices, of, you know, all of the things that have happened to us throughout our lives. And so, yeah, I think men write very differently. And I have male friends though, who are, you know, male author friends who are, you know, really careful about this. They're really concerned about making sure that they write women appropriately. You know, there's been a lot of, you know, and there's often stuff on Twitter and things like that, you know, kind of highlighting men who talk about women's bodies, you know, so they might be talking about their boobs or whatever, and they'll be, you know, they'll get it so badly wrong. And you think no woman would ever write about her breasts in that way. It's just like completely wrong. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, from something as, you know, I mean, I'm being a bit flippant, but, you know, from something like that to, you know, how a woman might feel if she, you know, had lost a much longed for baby, say, or something like that. But by the same token, you know, I'm not saying that men couldn't write those characters, because they absolutely can, you know, by talking to their female friends or wives or girlfriends or whatever. Yeah.
And I think you're right, Fia. I completely agree with that. But I think that every writer would treat it differently, whether they're male or female. As you say, we're all products of our kind of own experience. And so I think if you gave the same story to, you know, a number of men and women, everybody is obviously going to tackle that completely differently. So I don't think it's necessarily just a male-female thing. Although, yeah, maybe writing about dodgy body parts in certain ways is a male-female thing. I don't know. But yeah, I think that we are just, you know, we're all different, so we all write differently.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's a male-female thing necessarily either, because we write about, I mean, I write a lot about things that haven't happened to me. I write about abortion, and I write about unwanted pregnancies and missing girls and murders and things that haven't happened to me. But I think it's about being a writer is being empathetic. So you've got to have that skill of empathy. And if you've experienced something in your own life, some extreme emotion like grief or something which most people have experienced, then you can apply that to a different situation, not within reason, but I think that you can, you know, like in The Missing Girl, I could apply my own emotions to how they might feel in that situation, even though I haven't.
Yeah, and one person's experience of grief could send them plummeting into a deep depression, which might take them many years to recover from, and someone else might, you know, be able to handle that loss, you know, more easily. And so even something like that, you know, we're all wired differently, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. That's the end of the questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Annie. Thank you. And thank you for just making sure it all goes smoothly. Thank you. No, she's very good. Okay, great. So last thing is competition to win a set of all 4 books. Very exciting. I know. And I've decided what the question is going to be. Right, even better. So if you're here, if you're tuning in, if you're watching, Alex, this includes you, but you can shout out your answer.
I've got them all.
I've
read them already.
Oh, you've got them. He's got them already. That's fine.
I've read them already, and they're all excellent. So whoever wins will be in for a treat.
Great endorsement. Thank you. So please put your answer in the chat box, not the Q&A box. All night I've been saying put it in the Q&A. Don't put this in Q&A. Put this in chat, and the first person who answers correctly wins all 4 books.
Oh, pressure, Laura.
Yeah, I know. Oh my god. Right, so the question is, what is the title of Val Dermott's first book? Val McDermott, even.
Oh, I know this.
Do you know? Fiona knows. Fiona knows.
I don't know.
What is the title of Val McDermott's first
published or unpublished?
Published. Yes, it was published in 1987.
Wow. Everyone's googling that.
No. I'm a bit traumatized in case I got it wrong, so I was just checking to see if I was right.
Lucky I was only one.
The quickest person to get there. Come on, someone get there.
Oh, it's all about who can Google fastest and who can type fastest.
It's becoming a life skill now, isn't it?
Oh, there's somebody.
Yes. Who is that? Is that Harry?
Yeah, Harry. Looks like her. Correct.
Congratulations! It was correct. You knew that, didn't you?
I did.
Yes, he knew it. Brilliant. Harry, send me an email on libraryevents@hillingdon.gov.uk with your address, and I will get those in the post for you. That's wonderful. Really hope you enjoyed it. thank everyone so much for tuning in, and massive thank you to the 4 lovely ladies. Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you so much, and hopefully see you again soon in person.
Indeed.
Yes. Happy
Definitely.
reading, everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Take care, guys. See you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.